For this week's object lesson, I'll be looking at objects related to the fat acceptance movement. And I imagine that some of you are going to say, the what? But this is the movement that eventually led to what we now call body positivity. And the idea is to look at how fat people are treated in society and to correct some of the wrongs and the injustices that such people feel. And when I'm looking at artifacts like this, there's always a mixture of how much am I just giving a history lesson and how much am I talking about myself, because this whole project really is kind of my own thing. And on that regard, I have to acknowledge that I've always been more attractive to, specifically to fat women, and that I myself am a fat person, although I haven't always been a fat person. Of course, I'm 56 now, and one's body changes tremendously over time. But I think underneath it all, what really fascinates me is the way that people are seen and treated because of their incarnation. And I am drawn to fights around injustices, around people being mistreated because of the body that they occupy. This ties in somewhat with furry, and also I think is in line with both Black civil rights and other racial-related civil rights issues, because they're about what people look like. It's not a religious thing where you don't see immediately. You immediately see what a person is and you make a judgment on them, as well as women's civil rights movements, because once again, you see, you make a decision, you act. And this is very much in line with that. So going to the first artifact, we have Fatso. This came out, and I'm going to have to remind myself here, this came out in 1994, run by, they list themselves as Marilyn Henrietta Hank Wan. At the time, I knew them as Marilyn Wan. We did know each other when this came out. And they were originally a professional writer for Nurseweek. Interestingly, they were working for Nurseweek fairly soon after I was working for Macweek, both industry publications, of course. And it really reflects their excellent, I'll just focus here, make sure that everything is clear. It really reflects their excellent professionalism in the field. And that's something that you see in a lot of these early zines, is that the content, there's a bunch of buts. The content can be way better than the presentation, or way better than the presentation would at first suggest. But of course, this was the age of the zine, and that's going to lead me to the second one, another one that's really very well put together, and I would say more radical in the sense that it's addressing more of an outgroup, and that's Fat Girl. This is specifically for fat dykes and the women who want them. Now, is this dyke meaning lesbian and bisexual, or is it just meaning lesbian? Because at the time, you couldn't be sure. Bisexual inclusion in lesbian movements was not really a thing until well into the 2000s, at least more or less universal acceptance. In 1988, I think it was, one of the gay lesbian marches wouldn't let the bis march because the lesbians felt that it diluted their brand, so to speak. But anyway, getting back to Fat Girl, I'm probably going to have to blur some of this. Well, there's some things I'm probably going to have to blur if YouTube's going to show it, because YouTube is, of course, an American company, and American companies don't like female nipples, among other things. But once again, this is a lot of words and a lot of stuff put together. Lorianne Selke I knew actually fairly well. That's another interesting thing, is that the fact that I have these publications suggests, first of all, an interest on my part, but also these were not widespread publications. So a lot of the time I knew the people who were involved in these things. And I don't say that with any special sense of accomplishment. I mean, I'm very happy that I was there on the ground, but really it's just a self-selected group of artifacts, let's say. But anyway, quite good. And I do also want to do a little bit of a brag on this. I won't show the picture itself, but if you look at the credits at the beginning, let me just get this centered. doing this sort of sideways, so make sure that that's focused. I believe I was the first male contributor, and possibly the only one, but I think somebody else later contributed some photos. I won't show the photo because, again, I'd have to blur it for YouTube. The next artifact I'm bringing up is called Dimensions, and this was sort of a softcore porn magazine, although calling it porn is perhaps a bit of a stretch. Really, it's just, well, I could show you some of the pictures because they're at a level that I don't think YouTube would actually require blurring. Or maybe they would because they're fat models. Often things are acceptable for more common models that won't show up, that won't be allowed for fat models. But anyway, I'm just gonna leaf through this a little bit. This was 1997. Once again, I knew this cover model, strangely enough. I didn't know her well, but we chatted on AOL or something like that. Of course, we have phone lines. We have personal ads. And we have actually fairly well-written articles. And by the way, if you were to read this article, I don't know if it's clear enough to read in this form, but although it's about diet drugs, it's certainly not advocating for diet drugs. It's saying, okay, what is the situation? How does this affect us? Is this a reasonable reflection of health concerns, or is it just bleaching skin for dark-skinned people? Yeah, and as you see, well, there we have some ads for porn, but once again, it's all very mild. Moving on, I'd like to bring us to Zaftig. This is more of a journal-like publication. Zaftig, by the way, is Yiddish for fat, but it literally means juicy. I live in the Netherlands, and in Dutch it would be sappig. And I think the German is very similar to Zaftig as well. But anyway, I say it's more journal-like because as you go through it, you see that it is text and drawings and poetry and photographs. And it's about the inner life, I would say, more than, say, political activism or sex, as some of the earlier ones we saw were. Fatso is, I would say, political activism. Fat Girl is both political and sexual. Dimensions is obviously sexual. This is more the inner life. And once again, I knew the person involved, Hannah Blank. Strangely enough, she and I were schoolmates. We were both at the Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. Let's see, can I get this? Oh, there we go. Yeah. We were both at the Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music in the late 80s. She was a voice major and I was a composition major. But just going back to the contents once again, as I say, it's poetry, drawings, more of a literary journal than anything else. The last one is kind of just a fun thing. It doesn't really fit in the line with the others, but it gives a little bit of funny historical information, because the antipathy, the hostility towards fat people is actually quite recent. If you look at some of the health ads from 100 years ago, you'll see things like, put weight on and, become more healthy, become more solid in that way. And we could talk at some point about the reasons for that. If you want to look up the history of fat and actuarial tables, the tables that insurance companies use to decide how much to charge people. And one thing they did was they just suddenly lowered the weights that were acceptable on all of them and were able to collect more money. But this is from before then. This is the 1930s and 40s, and this is a collection of postcards. I'll zoom in a little bit. And, you could argue about how good it is that, let's see, how do I do this? There we go. How good it is that it's basically about the subject's bodies. But as you look at the pictures, I really like this artist because there's kind of a sense of, fun. These are not unhappy people. These are people who are enjoying their lives and who are maybe surprising those around them, but largely being appreciated. And I say that's a good start. Next week, I'm going to be doing something unusual. I'm going to be looking at a video game that I've known about for a while and that's very relevant to what I'm doing. And or at least that's my plan. We'll see what actually happens.